Welcome to the Using Widgets and Creating Dashboards video. My name is Janelle and I'm part of the Relativity Training team. In this video, you will learn how to use widgets to create and customize dashboards. Widgets and dashboards work together, so let's start with widgets. A widget is simply a method of representing the data in your workspace visually. Using widgets, you can identify trends or patterns in your workspace data, simplifying the analysis process. There are two types of widgets, pivots and cluster visualization. Pivots let you visualize document metadata and coding information. There are multiple types of pivots you can use, such as bar charts, stacked bar charts, pie charts, line charts, and tables. Cluster visualization displays your cluster data as an interactive map in either a circle pack or dial visualization, allowing you to see a quick overview of your cluster sets. Dashboards enable you to customize how widgets are displayed on a page. You can place any number of widgets onto a dashboard, and then use these widgets to gain insight into document metadata, manage workflows, and gauge reviewer progress at a glance. For this lesson, we'll use a scenario to demonstrate how to build dashboards with a few widgets to accelerate review in a case. Let's say that as a project manager, it is our job to ensure the case review is progressing efficiently. We'd like to see how the review is progressing and identify potentially relevant documents for review based on known keywords. We'll do this by reporting on responsiveness, issues, and priority keywords. Let's get started by using widgets and dashboards. I've logged us into Relativity and opened our workspace. We are currently looking at the document list. Per our scenario, we want to see how the review is progressing. So first, we'll look at how documents are coded on the responsive designation field. In the top right, you can see the Add Widgets icon. I'll click this icon now. As discussed previously, there are two types of widgets I can add: pivot and cluster visualizations. I'll add a pivot widget. There are a handful of drop-down fields to configure here. At the top is Pivot Profile. We'll come back to this later when we create a profile for our pivot reports. I'll click Group By and select the Responsiveness Designation field. Note that only fields that you enable for Group By at the field level will be selectable on this list. I'm going to leave Grand Total as the Pivot On field to see the responsive designation coding values across all documents. For the default display type, I'll leave Bar Chart. I'll click the Add Pivot button. You can see a bar chart is placed above the document list. It's a simple bar chart, but it helps us see the breakdown of how the documents in this workspace are coded for responsiveness. If I hover over each of these bars, I can see the total document count. Let's expand on this pivot by displaying the responsive designation coding by custodian. I'll click the menu button and select Edit Pivot. Now I'll change the pivot on from Grand Total to Custodian, which is a field that has already been enabled for pivot. Next, I'll click Save. That's hard to see. I'll click and drag on the corner of the chart to expand it. It looks a little better now, but because this case has a large number of custodians, the chart has a very long tail, and it's difficult to see the individual values. Fortunately, we can limit the results that the chart shows so that we can focus on the most important information. I'll click Menu, Edit Pivot, and change the pivot on results returned to top 5 per group. I'll also change the default display type by choosing Stacked Bar Chart and click Save. Now we can see that each responsive designation value has its own bar with the custodian breakdown stacked together. I'll make this chart a little smaller. This widget will enable me to monitor the responsiveness coding for this project, but it did take a bit of configuration to set up the pivot the way I wanted to see it. To save time and effort later, I can save these settings as a pivot profile. I'll then be able to easily pull up this style chart in the future. I'll click Menu once more and select Save Pivot Profile. The Pivot Profile window opens. Here I can give this profile a name, Responsiveness by Custodian, and I'll click Save. The Responsiveness by Custodian Pivot Profile will now be available in the Pivot Profile drop-down menu wherever we are creating a new pivot in this workspace. Thinking back to our scenario, we are interested in monitoring the entire review, so it would be helpful to see the breakdown of issue coding across the document set. To do this, let's create a pie chart. I'll click Add Widget, then Pivot. We won't be using a pivot profile for this one. I'm going to set the group by to issue designation. Then I'll change the default display type from bar chart to pie chart. I'll click the Add Pivot button. Like the bar chart, I can hover over any of the values on the chart itself or the legend to see the document counts. If I click on one of the values, say Risk Management, this will automatically apply a search condition, as you can see in the search panel on the left side of the page. This will narrow down my document set to all documents that have been tagged with the issue choice of Risk Management. Over 2,500 of them have been tagged with this issue. Once the search conditions are applied, the bar chart updates dynamically as well as the document list. Lastly, you can see on the pie chart that there are documents that have multiple issue tags associated to them. You can see how the interactivity of these pivot charts let you quickly get a sense of the information in your workspace. Before moving on, I'm going to clear the search conditions by clicking Clear All Conditions. Currently, our screen shows us a breakdown of responsiveness and issues in our workspace. We'd like to refer back to this information later so we can see how the case is progressing. We could add and configure these pivots again, but that would require us to do all the work we already did. Instead, let's save this set of pivots as a dashboard. Once we do this, we will be able to open this from the dashboard menu at any time and instantly see these charts again. I'll click the dashboard menu. You can see that a few have already been set up in this workspace. To save our new dashboard, I'll click Save As, and I'll name it Review QC. I'll give it an order of 10 and click Save. Our dashboard is now saved. If I click on the menu again, you can see it on the list. Anyone with the proper permissions can now use this dashboard at any time without having to rebuild it. It will also be available to link to other objects, such as saved searches or views. Check out our documentation site at help.relativity.com for more information about how to link a dashboard to an object. To report and review progress to someone who doesn't have access to Relativity, I could easily export the dashboard by clicking the export icon next to the dashboard dropdown. As you can see, Relativity generated a new Excel workbook. Our next task is to identify potentially relevant documents so that we can prioritize them in our review. Let's start by adding a cluster visualization widget. First, I'll remove the other widgets. Now I'll click Add Widget. This time I'll select Cluster Visualization. On the Cluster Visualization settings window, I'll select which cluster I want to visualize. You can have multiple cluster sets in a workspace, but you can only have one cluster visualization widget at a time on a dashboard. I'll select the All Documents set and click Apply. The cluster visualization widget displaying the circle pack is added to the dashboard. I can now see and interact with the clusters in this set. If I press Control and click a cluster, then click Apply, a filter will be added to the search panel, and the document list will only show the documents in this cluster. I'll go ahead and clear those conditions. To switch to the dial visualization of this cluster, I'll click the menu button and then Dial. Now in our scenario, we wanted to identify which clusters contain potentially relevant documents. We'll add a pivot to our dashboard to help with this. This pivot will show the results of a previously run search terms report. I'll add another widget. I'm going to set up the group by to str key terms. I'll pivot on the grand total. And lastly, I'll change the default display type to table. All right, I'll click Add Pivot. Our key terms table has been added. I can hover over these results like any of the charts. I can also select specific terms. Let's say the term contract was important to me. I would just click on that. It's now highlighted yellow. Once I've finished my selection, I'll click Apply. We've now added a filter for all documents with this term in them, but notice what happened on the cluster visualization widget. The colors of the clusters changed to reflect the filter we added. The darker the shading on a cluster, the higher percentage of the documents in that cluster that match our currently applied filters. In this case, the darker shading means more documents with this key term in them. I can see right away that there are a few clusters that are darker than the others, so I could quickly select these clusters and tag the documents in them for priority review. By using these two widgets in tandem, I'm able to make my review far more efficient. We have come to the end of this video. You should now have a better understanding of how to use Relativity's widget and dashboard functionality. If you want to learn more, visit our documentation site at help.relativity.com. Thank you for joining me.